My cousin reached out to me earlier that week and she said, you can leave, right? And I was shocked that the thought that I could leave the order, because the thought of ending my life was so at the forefront of my mind, but the thought of leaving was not even a thought in my head. So that's how brainwashed I was, because growing up, we were taught it is better for you to die in the order than to leave the order.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in a family with 4 moms and 35 kids. We were members of the FLDS Church, which is a polygamous group run by their prophet Warren Jeffs, who is now serving a life sentence in prison.
I was raised mainstream LDS in Utah. Sam and I have been married for 10 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. And we want to quickly thank all of you so much for your support. We have officially surpassed our goal of 100,000 subscribers.
Woo!
So thank you all so much for being here and supporting us along the way.
Yes, we are so grateful, and we're so excited today to have a special interview. We met Luann Cooper at the Holding Out Help Gala, and she had just an incredible, powerful story, and loved getting to listen to her there, and we just had to have her on. She's also the founder of Hope After Polygamy, which is an organization that helps give scholarships to people who have left polygamous communities and help them further their education, which we feel super passionately about. So we were so excited to hear more. Thanks so much for being here, Luann.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Our pleasure. Yes, we are so interested in hearing your story. We've only ever had Amanda Ray from the Kingston Group on our channel before. So to have someone else's story from that same group, the Kingstons, we're very intrigued and are interested to hear how you went from growing up in this polygamous community to now helping people that are trying to escape or that are leaving these communities. So very intrigued. Thank you for being here. And I guess we'll just start with the question we always start with from the beginning. How many mothers did you have in your family and how many siblings?
Well, my dad had 13 wives. And I found out after I left that I have 79 siblings.
Wow.
Or
79.
maybe I'm part of that 79, so there's 79 of us. But growing up, we didn't know who my dad's other families were. That's how big of a secret everything was. I would interact with siblings, and I didn't even know they were my siblings within the group.
Oh my word. Okay, and I'm
Wow.
so excited to get into some of the differences, because we talk a lot about the FLDS since that's where Sam's from. But I've always felt like the Kingstons have so much secrecy, and hearing this, even like within the group, there's like secrecy between them so much that I just have so many questions that I'm excited to have you answer. But as a child growing up, and so you're not knowing who your siblings are, and you didn't know who the other mothers were, did each mother live in a separate house? Is that how you were separated?
Yeah, every mother typically lived in a separate house. There was the few exceptions. So my childhood home, we grew up in my grandpa's home. And it was my grandpa, my mom, and my aunt. And my mom and my aunt were married to the same person. So they were sisters and sister wives. And I didn't know that they were married to the same person growing up. In fact, I didn't know that I was supposed to have a dad until I was 6 years old. So
Wow.
when I was 6, it occurred to me because nobody else did, you know.
Oh
Like I
my
had
word.
I had one cousin, her mom was a first wife, and so she had a dad, but I didn't know that I was supposed to have a dad until I was 6. And then I started looking around at church, trying to figure out who my dad was, paying attention to who my mom was talking to and who my siblings were talking to, and I could not figure it out. And so I finally asked my mom, who is my dad? And she just burst into tears and she swore me to secrecy. And she said, you can't tell anybody, but it is brother Ortel. And I immediately realized how disappointing that was, because I knew I was never going to have a relationship with him, because he's the leader of the order and he was so busy. But also, anytime we had to go in to a meeting with my mom to meet with him for a business meeting, we were prepped ahead of time to not make a sound. Don't make a sound. Don't talk to him, don't make yourself noticeable. And I could just feel the stress that my mom had from going into this meeting with me. And sometimes she would just leave me out in the hallway because it was easier for her that way. But yeah, when I found out that Brother Ortel was my dad, it was just an immediate disappointment. It's like, well, that's
Gotcha.
that.
Oh
S-
my
So,
word.
so how many children does your mom have?
So my mom has 8, and I'm her
8.
youngest.
Okay.
Wow.
And then you said that your father had leadership role. And what kind of leadership role is there? And like, who is the leader of the Kingston? I know you also called it the order, right? Is that what the
Yeah.
members call it? Is the order? And like, is it outsiders like me who's calling it the Kingstons?
Yeah. So the members inside call it the order,
Okay.
which doesn't make sense to anybody on the outside. On the outside, it's called the Kingston Group or the Kingston Polygamous Group or the Kingston Polygamous Clan, however they want to
Yeah.
call it. But within the group, we call it the order. And we call each other brother and sister. And so my dad was Brother Ortel, and he was the leader until he died. And now my half brother is the leader, Paul Kingston.
Okay. And
Hmm.
did you guys call him the leader or was he considered a prophet or are there apostles? What's the hierarchy set up like in the church?
So the words prophet or but those words were taboo because we didn't want to get him into trouble by calling him
Okay.
something that gave him too much hierarchy, but he was the leader of the order,
Okay.
and that's how we knew him. But then on a church level, then he was considered the prophet, but in a regular conversation, we would call him the leader.
Okay.
Interesting. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. Obviously, you have 8, your mother has 8 children. So your dad, though he was the prophet at the time, I mean, he must have met up with your mom on occasion. How does this work, right? So your dad never entered your home growing up?
I'm sure he did. I only remember, so he died when I was 7. And
Okay.
I remember
Oh,
him visiting my mom one time and my aunt one time in my
I see.
life. And part of that is because Alma LeBaron, who was the leader after Ervil went to jail,
Oh,
met with my dad. And Alma LeBaron sent 2 of his daughters to live with my mom as a peace offering after the whole Ervil LeBaron episode went down. And so while those girls were living in my mom's home, he would not visit them. And they were there for a couple of years. One of them had Hispanic blood, and one of them didn't. And my oldest brother from my mom ended up marrying her. I'm pretty sure that was the plan. Here are my 2 daughters. If your sons are interested. I remember hearing conversation growing up. Well, if so and so would just pull it together, they could marry this girl. She's sitting here waiting for him.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that there were close ties between the LeBarons and
the
the
Kingstons.
Kingstons.
Yeah,
I mean, I only know what I saw, so I don't know just how close they were. But or Alma LeBaron would come to my mom's house for dinner. I would say a handful of times during those years. But we were kids and we were sent into the hallway to eat because there wasn't room for us, so we never heard the conversation between them.
I see.
Gotcha. So you're growing up with these big families. How were mothers supported then? If they're each in their own households and it's not all under one roof, were they receiving like payments from your father or were the women expected to work or what did that look like for a household?
So my mom worked and she supported the household, and
Okay.
my aunt stayed home with the kids, which was a unique situation within the order. And my aunt stayed home with my mom's kids, but mostly because my grandpa, their father, had Alzheimer's and she was taking care of him. And my grandpa was Clyde Gustavus. He was the second man to join the order. And he, like, my whole life, I remember him having Alzheimer's. And he died when I was 12. And she would take care of him. And as he was declining, she took care of him. And as kids, we would help her. And so my mom would cover the majority of the bills. And I don't know if my grandpa helped with that because I know he wasn't working. I don't know. Like my aunt had a sewing business at home, and so she did have some income, but I was a kid, so I don't know exactly how that happened, but I do remember my mom, would once a month pay the bills, and I would sit with her and watch her do that. And so she was in charge of the overall making sure everything was paid for in our
Okay.
home. And then when I grew up, my sisters were in charge of supporting them and their kids, and I was in charge of supporting myself and my kids when I was married and moved out. And it was normal. I watched my brothers' wives support themselves, and then they would argue with my brothers about, well, you're not paying for anything. How am I supposed to afford anything? And so those conversations happened a lot. But
Mm.
mostly in the Kingston group, the wives support themselves and their kids.
Wow,
Wow.
that's quite the responsibility. I was speaking of
Hmm.
this, I was going to ask you that this was so different for you because the way I was raised, all the mothers were in the same home, so the talk of polygamy was this very big topic, and we were very proud to be polygamists. You know, we were continuing on with what God had restored through Joseph Smith, and we were very proud of it, and we would never deny it. But it sounds like it was very much done in secret from where you're from, so you wouldn't really see one husband and multiple wives in one home. But was that kind of thing talked about? Like, were you expecting to be a plural wife at some point growing up?
Well, watching my sisters grow up and become plural wives, I just assumed that I would also follow in their footsteps. But then growing up and seeing the politics at work and seeing who was allowed to marry who, and going to the dances and seeing who was allowed to dance with who,
Mm.
Mm.
and all of that, it was very apparent growing up. And when I say growing up, like by the time I was 12, I knew this, that I would become a plural wife. And we also had marriage prep classes that we started when we were 12.
Okay.
And I think it was, I can't remember if it was Sunday school on Sundays or if it was young people meeting, but they had young people meeting on Friday nights and Saturday night meetings. I can't remember what those were called, and then Sunday meetings. And so we were always going to church and
Mm.
learning about what our duties were. So by the time I was 12, I knew that I would be a plural wife.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And then another question just about childhood in general, but like, were you going to public schools? Do they have their own schools, homeschool? What is the schooling situation like for you as a child?
So now in the Kingston group, they have their own school. But for
Okay.
me growing up, I went to public school. And before I started kindergarten at the age of 5, I was prepped very well on how to talk about my dad, how to talk about my family, the things I was allowed to say. Let's see, they told me what my dad's name was that I was allowed to tell people. But at this point, if you remember, I didn't know who my dad was.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't figure that out till I was 6. I went to kindergarten when I was 5, which is probably why I started thinking about, like, who is my dad? Why am I being prepped for this? Basically, I was prepped to just not talk about the order in case somebody started asking me questions about my family. And we were also taught that we are the elite. We are better than everybody we're going to school with. And so we weren't allowed to make friends and we weren't allowed to interact with them after school. And so that made for a very lonely time at the public school. And I remember going thinking, okay, if I'm the one that's going to heaven, then why is everybody else so much happier than I am?
Mhm. That'd be
Wow,
so
that's
difficult as a kid. And from what I understand, like the Kingstons, you're not off on a compound, right? You're living in
Mhm.
regular houses in typically in the Salt Lake Valley, right?
Yeah, so they're mostly in the Salt Lake Valley. They're also in Davis County. I grew up in
I
Bountiful in Davis County, across the street from the elementary school that I went to. And the neighbors knew that we were polygamous. I would say by the time I was in 4th grade, then kids would throw rocks at us on the way home from school and call us polygamous. And we were fine with it because we were better than them and we didn't
Yeah.
have very far to run. So,
Well, and that kind of persecution, as you probably called it, was just a faith builder, I imagine, because for us, when people would persecute us, we would say, well, it's because we are God's elite and they are just working for Satan and they are angry because they don't have what we have. Is that similar
yeah,
to the thoughts you had?
yeah, for sure.
Wow. Okay. So you are g- basically told what to say as you go into kindergarten. You're in public school, but you're not allowed to have friends. It sounds pretty isolated outside of just the Kingston group that you're able to have like Sunday school and youth group with. And you start getting marriage prep at the age of 12.
Hmm.
When was the
Mhm.
expected age to get married? Like you're saying at 12, you already knew that you were going to become a plural wife. What other type of things were you taught about your role as a young woman?
One of the main things that we were taught that I remember is if you're not happy in your marriage, then that is your own fault and you need to figure it out. And so that was huge and brought up often. But mostly I just watched my cousins and my half sisters get married at 14 and 15 and thinking it was just terrifying for me because I remember thinking we're just kids. Like what how are we supposed to do this? And they were marrying men in their 30s and 40s. So, growing up in Bountiful, I tried to not be noticed as much as possible because everybody
Mm.
else was getting married off and nobody had talked to me yet. So I thought if I just don't get close to the leader or if I just don't stand out, then I can hold off getting married as much as I can. And so I really felt lucky to be able to go all the way through ninth grade because most of my cousins and half sisters didn't make it past seventh grade. And so when I was approached and told I'm not going to school the next year, I was like, yeah, they've got everybody else. Like
Oh my
I'm the
word.
one that they're noticing now because I'm one of the single, last few single girls, and I was 15.
Oh my gosh. Is it
Yikes.
arranged marriages or it sounds like there wouldn't be any dating if it's starting that young. Was it all arranged?
Yeah, it was. My mom let me know that Jeremy's asking for me, and he would pick me up at such and such time to take me for ice cream. He was going to pick me up at work, and I couldn't drive. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't run away. And if I did, what would happen to me? So I
Mm.
just kind of, okay, well, here we go. He picked me up and we went to ice cream, and he basically said, I'm supposed to marry you as soon as possible. And I said, well, maybe you're the right person for me to marry, but I don't feel like I'm ready yet. Because I was grasping for straws trying to figure out what can I say to get out of this because I knew there wasn't really anything I could do. And so that led to weeks of meeting with Paul and Jeremy. Paul's the leader. So I met with
Mm.
them every week for a while until I finally said, okay, yeah, I'm ready. And then I was married 3 days later.
Oh
Three
my,
three
3
days
days?
later.
Yes, because while I'm going to these meetings with Paul and Jeremy, my mom's at home sewing a wedding dress. My sisters are at the store picking out flowers. And I'm just I would come home to this and they would ask my opinion. And I would just be like, yeah, that's great. Like, I
Oh
did
my
not
word.
care. And so they took me to the store and they said, pick out flowers. And I picked navy blue and dark teal and dark maroon. I picked the darkest colors I
That's how you
could
were
find
feeling.
in the store because I thought, well, it's pretty and that's how I feel. And so
Mm.
those were the colors of the flowers and they're like, "Yeah, that's great." Which I was surprised. I mean, it was just interesting to observe how it was all going down around me and how I
Mhm.
didn't really need to say yes or no to anything. It was just going to happen whether I was on board or not.
So,
Wow.
so within the Kingston Group, we often hear pure bloodline. Can you speak to that and along with that, were you related to Jeremy when you were asked to marry him?
Yeah, so my dad, he was breeding cows at the Woods Cross farm and realized if we can get a purebred cow, we can we can keep our bloodline pure too. And so he started having his kids marry each other, half siblings,
Oh,
just experimenting with that. And so my sisters married their half siblings. And
Oh,
when I ended up marrying my cousin, who was also my nephew, because his parents are first cousins. Also, my parents, my mom is married to her uncle. And so yeah, when
yikes.
I realized I'm not marrying my half brother, so I mean, this is better than that would be. So
oh my goodness.
I did consider myself lucky that my cousin that I was marrying was not my half brother and he wasn't in his 40s. He was 23. So I guess I was just looking for anything good about it, even though there wasn't.
Yeah. Oh my
Wow.
word. Okay, so he's 23, you're 15. Did he have any other wives at this point, or were you his first wife?
Yeah, I was his fourth wife.
Fourth wife?
Fourth?
Hmm.
At
Yeah,
23, he had
yeah,
4 wives.
yeah. I know,
Sorry, that's taking a second to, like, sink in, because I
right?
mean, it's never not a little culture shock for me, but typically, you hear a lot of times by the time people are on their 4th or 5th wife, like, they're much older, like 30s, 40s, 50s. So to have 4, was that considered, like did he have a lot of favor in the eyes of the leader? Was that considered a big honor to have that many wives that young?
He did act like it was an honor, because at the wedding, that's all he talked about was, oh wow, I can't believe I get four wives. But I also remember he married his first wife when he was 16 and she was
Oh
Oh,
my
15. So
wow.
I mean, at least they're close in age, but still,
So
wow,
young.
16 and 15. I cannot imagine trying
No.
to
yeah,
navigate life. Granted, I do have to admit, when I was 16 in the FLDS church, I thought I was ready to be married, but that's just because that's the way we were raised, that marriage
yeah,
is the next thing in life, right? And you're not allowed to date. So the first time you're going to be able to spend time with anyone from the opposite sex is marriage. So I think that's why I was thinking about it at such a young age.
Yeah, what happens with your schooling? So at 15, you're just told no more school for you, you're just done?
it really depends on the situation. Typically, if it's a boy, then they finish school and they go on to college, but they go to college for what they're told to go to college for, not what they want to go to college for. But for
Okay.
girls, we don't have any reason to finish school. I was told you don't even need to finish high school because you're already going to have a job as soon as you drop out. The order has so
Mm.
many jobs for you to fulfill that you don't need a high school education.
And that's something that we hear a lot too, is that the Kingstons have so many businesses that they only work for other Kingstons, and that they just have a ton of money coming in through all of their different businesses. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I would guess they have about 200 businesses. It's hard to keep track of what businesses they are because they start them and they end them, sometimes pretty quick. But there are a few businesses that I have heard that have been established for years, and I have heard that they profit about 1 million a month. And those are the businesses that need more employees, of course.
Man, so most of the mothers who are supporting their entire families because they are in a house by themselves, not getting support from the husbands, are most of those mothers working for Kingston companies?
Yes, they're working for Kingston companies, or they're doing daycare, or they're doing both. They're trading off half and half with another sister, a sister wife, or another polygamous wife.
Wow.
Okay.
So once you were married, did you have to go straight to work as well, along with the rest of the mothers, or what were you required to do?
Yeah, I was. I was 15. I got a phone call the night before my wedding, told where I was going to start working after my honeymoon. And then I stayed living at my mom's house for about a year until an apartment opened up, and then I moved into my own apartment when I was 16, started paying my own bills, signed up utilities, enter my name. I was 16. I went to work every day. I came home, took care of my house, and that's what I was expected to do.
Okay, you can tell me if this is too personal a question, but again, since you didn't have children at that point, would he just like rotate from house to house depending on the night? Or like was he not going to the other wives' homes that have children because he didn't want to let them know that there were kids? So did he stay with you more often because you didn't have children yet? Like what did that look like as being completely by yourself at 16 in a house, just being married but being alone most of the time, I'm guessing?
It was very it was weird. It was different because
Yeah.
after I got married at 15, my mom wasn't responsible for me anymore, so she didn't keep track of me anymore. But then my husband didn't keep track of me either. And so as long as I showed up to work when I was expected to, then nobody really cared what I did other around those hours. And so I did get into some mischief, but I hung out with other order kids, and when I say mischief, like we went to the movies and we went to the mall and things that we weren't supposed to be doing, but we knew nobody was watching us, so we did. We let's see. The job that I started working at when I got married was the answering service, and I got put on night shift a lot. And so
Mm,
he would try to visit me every 4 nights because that was the rotation. But
mhm.
if I was on night shift, I wasn't home, and he would get mad at me for not being home on the nights that he would come over. And then I found out later that he was telling my boss to have me work night shifts more often than other people. So he really liked putting me in a situation where I was going to get into trouble no matter what.
Weird. I
Ugh.
wonder if he just wanted to have a reason to prove or show that he was in charge in some way, and needed something to get mad at you about. That just seems so weird.
Well, I know he didn't like me. I would ask him often. I was like, "Why don't you like me? Like, what can I do to be a good wife?" And he would just sit there and yell at me and tell me all the things I was doing wrong, which
Mm,
half of it wasn't true. And so then I realized, well, I there's nothing I can do to be a good wife, so I'm just going to try to do the best I can. And so I would come home from work and clean a clean house. And then when he
mhm.
would visit me, then he would get mad at me because there was a cup in the sink. My house wasn't clean enough. But then if I wasn't home when he was supposed to be there, then was I out sleeping around with somebody else? My aunt got a phone call one night from Jeremy's grandma, who was married to the same man as my aunt. And she said, "Luann is not home. Do you know where she's at?" And this was at 2 o'clock in the morning. And my aunt said, "Well, yeah, she's working night shift. That's where she's at." And
Yeah.
so nobody ever came to the business that I worked at to check on me. I was 16 and I worked in the basement of the building. It's now apartments, but it's that giant building next to Squatters on Broadway in Salt Lake.
Dang.
So that was a Kingston run business at one point.
Yeah. And they've since sold it.
Okay, so even though you were working at a young age, you were still working for the church. Therefore, they had control over your money. They had control over every aspect of your life, it sounds like, at this point, including your job and what you were supposed to be doing every single moment of the day. So, I mean, that's a lot of control.
Yeah, we didn't have to make our own decisions. They made them for us.
Dang.
In the FLDS church, there's a term called keep sweet. Did you guys have
Okay.
something like that where, as women, you were just supposed to shut up and be happy about it?
Well, we didn't have a phrase for it, but that was what we were told to do. Just shut up and be happy about it. They're
Jeez.
Mhm.
really mean in the Kingston group. They don't say kind things like keep sweet. They just say, "Well, if you're not happy, that's your problem and you need to figure it out."
Mm.
Man.
At what point, like through all of growing up, did you ever question or doubt the process up to this point? Obviously, you had a little bit when you had hesitation of getting married so young, kind of having that intuition of maybe I'm not ready for this. I don't want to get married so young. Were there any other moments that made you question or doubt the group as a whole growing up?
Yeah, growing up, because I went to a public school, I remember constantly thinking, if we're the ones that are going to heaven, why is everybody else happier than we are? And that really stood out to me. And then when my niece was taken up to the Idaho border and beaten for running away from her husband, I was very involved in that. And so they asked me to be a witness for them. And I was a terrible witness because I would tell their attorney the truth and they would get mad at me for that. And I watched the leader literally say to me, "Oh, good grief, Luann, you can lie and cover up for her, but you can't do that for us."
Hmm.
And
Ugh.
a light bulb above my head just shone so bright. I just remember thinking, I shouldn't have to lie for you. You're men of
Mhm.
God. If God's protecting you, then why are you so scared right now? I watched the court prep happen for her dad that beat her, and I watched the court prep happen for her husband that she ran away from. And I just remember thinking, these are not men. These are not good men. Like, these are men that I have been admiring and essentially worshiping, and they're not even good people. And
Hmm.
that was really hard for me to digest and to come to terms with. And that happened right before I left. And that was part of what led me down a really deep depression to have suicidal ideation because when all of that was going down, me and her mom were getting blamed for her actions,
Hmm.
not
Ugh.
Daniel's actions for taking her to the Idaho border and beating her, but her actions for calling DCFS and asking for help.
Hmm.
Oh my God.
This was in 1998 when everything started being on the news and we were getting blamed for that. And so that's a really hard story to sum up for an event like holding out help.
Hmm.
You know,
Mhm.
I didn't know that I could explain all of that in such a short of time amount of time. But that is essentially the biggest reason why I left. That and I was just miserable. There was no way I was going to survive living as a polygamous wife, knowing that I wasn't loved, knowing that I had to make sure my girls went to bed before he came home to protect them. The day before I left, then my oldest, who was 2, had my husband's handprint on her face
Oh.
because she wasn't talking to anybody because that week I was packing all night long and then going to work during the day. And my 2-year-old was saying, "Where are we going? What are we doing?" And she started putting her stuff in the boxes because she wanted to come with me. And I had to tell her, "You can't tell anybody that we're putting our stuff in boxes." And she understood, and I'm sure she felt the intensity of what was happening. When I went to pick up my daughter from the babysitter, she had his handprint on her face, and he hid in the bedroom and made his first wife tell me what had happened. Of course, it was my daughter's fault. And I said, "It's okay. It's fine. Don't worry about it." Because I knew I was leaving the next day, and I didn't want to cause any attention on me and ruin my chances. So when I put her in the car, I just looked at her and I said, "You never have to see him again." And she just looked at me and nodded. And
Oh my
Oh,
I went home. And then I didn't take her back to the babysitter the next day because I was afraid to.
man.
at 2 years old. Oh, makes me
Mhm.
Man.
emotional.
Yeah, she was 2 and my baby was 8 months old.
Oh my goodness.
And how old were you at this time?
20.
20. Oh my
Okay.
word. So when did you said you had gone through the witnessing of the abuse and had kind of realized you were going to leave. Did you know where you were going to go? Had you been able to reach out and contact someone, or did you just know you couldn't be there anymore and you were just going to figure it out?
So my cousin reached out to me earlier that week and she said, "You know you can leave, right?" And I was shocked that the thought that I could leave the order, because the thought of ending my life was so at the forefront of my mind, but the
Mm.
thought of leaving was not even a thought in my head. So that's how brainwashed I was, because growing up, we were taught it is better for you to die in the order than to leave the order. Because if you die in
Mm.
the order, you'll go to heaven. But if you leave the order, you'll never go to heaven. And so that's just what was indoctrinated in my head. So when she said, "You know you can leave, right?" It was like, whoa, I can? Like, and I
Mm.
thought about it and I realized it's the same. If I leave,
Mhm.
it's spiritual suicide. If I end my life, it's physical suicide. And they're the same. But if I leave, I have a chance of taking my girls with me and protecting them. And so I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
know where I was going to go. But just the thought of having a different life than what I was struggling through at the time made me want to try. And I remember going back and forth in my head thinking, what in the heck am I doing? You know, why would I put myself through this? I am leaving everything I know and I don't know what I'm going to do. But there was just something inside of me that was just pushing me to keep going and keep trying and keep packing my stuff. And so I did. And I remember thinking, I am crazy, because if I don't get out with my girls, this is my one chance. Like, I don't know what's going to
Mhm.
happen to me or them if we are caught. And I found out later that when I went back for my things, my family was there, but my husband was around the corner waiting for somebody to either bring him me or bring him my girls. And
Mm.
so my intuition was very on point that I had one shot at getting out with my girls.
Wow.
Wow.
So where did you go?
So I have another cousin that left the year that I was born. And so my cousin that reached out to me, who I grew up with, connected me with her. And I stayed with her for a week, but I was occupying one of her kids' bedrooms. And so I knew it couldn't be a permanent thing. And so I immediately, the day after I left, I immediately started working on figuring out where I was going to live and what I was going to do. And so I went to an apartment complex, and there was an older couple that was cleaning the apartment there. And I asked them if they were the landlords, and they said yes. And so I told them my situation. I said, I just left the Polygamous group. I have two little girls. I don't have any credit. I don't have a job yet. You can't call any of my references because it's not safe. But I do have cash for last month's rent and security deposit, which is what's required here. Will you rent to me? And they just looked at me like, are you kidding me? And I just sat there and just waited for them to respond, because I just thought, I don't have any other option. Like, if they say no, I have to go beg somebody else to trust me to rent to me. And so they hesitated and they said, well, are you associated with the church at all, meaning the LDS church? And I said, no, but I've talked to missionaries before, trying to tell them something that they wanted to hear. So the landlords that I was talking to made me promise that I would go to the LDS church if I ever couldn't make rent. And I remember thinking in my head, I would never go to them for help. But of course I said, okay, yeah, for sure. And then they agreed to rent to me. And that same day, I went to my cousin's boss and gave him the same story. This is where I'm from. I I don't have any references. I don't have a resume. You can't call any of my previous employers because it's not safe. But I know that I'm a good employee. I've been working since I was 5. And will you give me a job? And the job that he gave me was selling family picture to people walking inside the Smith's grocery store. And so it was
Mm.
very much a job that nobody else wanted, and they were always looking to fill the position. But it was a job, and I took it. I quickly realized afterwards that I needed a job that paid more to support my girls. In order to get a job that paid more, I needed to have an education, and I didn't even have a GED or a high school diploma. So I felt very behind everybody else that was my age, which was frustrating.
At this time too,
Yeah.
did you have a sense of fear? Like you had seen what had happened to somebody else who tried to run away from her husband. What was that fear like? And was there ever any issues? Like, did he try to come and bring you back? Did you have issues dealing with them? Did you have to, I don't know, what was that process like?
Yes, so I had somebody call me within the group and say, "So and so is visiting you tonight, and they're supposed to kidnap your girls."
Oh
And
my.
so there were a couple of instances like that where people were visiting me and I couldn't trust them and they were supposed to take my girls and run. I would have conversations with my mom. She would say, "You know you took purebreds out of the order, right? If you ever can't handle being a mom, you can bring those back. You can bring those girls back." The fact that I took purebreds out of the order made them very angry and very upset. My mom sent me a message. She said, "I would have rather you died than left the order."
Oh
Oh my
And
God.
now I can take that as that was her way of saying she missed me, but she wasn't allowed to miss me. That was probably the most endearing way she could think of, and possibly the most endearing message she could think of. Like, "I wish you were still in the order. I would have rather you died than left the order because now I'm not in her life anymore."
man.
Right. I was going to ask, within the FLDS, it's like that. If you leave, you're not allowed to be with your family anymore. Is it the same way? You weren't allowed to go back and even visit with them at all because they're not in this closed off compound. They're just living in the city. You weren't allowed to go back at all.
It depends on the family. Some people can leave and still have somewhat of a relationship with their family that they left. I couldn't because as soon as I left, they were afraid that I was going to out them, like my niece, but also I was a witness when I was in the group.
Mm,
And I couldn't keep their secrets when I was in the group. So they didn't expect that I would be able to keep them after I left. And so they immediately ousted me and said, "You're not my sister anymore. You can't come around." So it was hard to watch other people be able to talk to their mom still and still have a relationship, even though as strained as it was for them to not have anything at all because they 100% did not trust me. That was really hard.
yeah.
Yeah. How long did it take after you leaving to start not believing the doctrine anymore? Or like had you had gone through that and unpacked the religious aspect of it beforehand, or was that something that you were processing after leaving physically?
It's definitely a process after you leave. When I first left, I very much didn't want to do anything to hurt anybody in the order. I wanted to keep the peace. I was okay if my girls married in the order. And then
Mm,
somebody said to me, "Why would you want your girls to marry in the order?" And it just kind of made me think, yeah, no, I didn't want them to marry in the order when I was there. But
Mm,
leaving my family, I love them so much. I just wanted to keep whatever kind of relationship I could in my own head, even though there was no
mm,
relationship with them. And so it was definitely a process to weed out the indoctrination and weed out that they're really just not good people. And then looking back at what I had been through with them and what they had put other people through, and just seeing who they really are after I had stepped out of the inner circle or out of the box of all the chaos. And then continuing to hear about all the abuse that is still going on in there, I realized by not saying anything, I'm protecting them. And all of that was a process. And so, but within a year after I left, I decided to start talking to the Attorney General's office to send my husband to jail. Because I was
Wow.
like, I don't know what all the rules are, but I am sure something illegal happened here. Because I was 15, I was a fourth wife, I'm related to him. Like, something, something has to be illegal to where he can go to jail. And I didn't think that sending him to jail would cause, like, be a cure all, but it would send them a message, if nothing else, that people are not going to stand for this. And
Mm.
so it took me a while to get the Attorney General's office on board with doing any kind of persecution. And in the process, I learned the word incest. I never knew that word before. I learned the word
Mm.
statutory rape. I didn't know those words. For me, that it all fell under the realm of polygamy. I didn't
Right.
know
Mm.
that was even a thing. And so to find out about that, I was just like, that is what they do. Like, and then realizing that they are worse than I even realized from growing up there. It was an eye opener, and it was definitely a process in sorting things out. And I would also say when you're in the Kingston group and possibly the other groups too, I don't know, but you don't necessarily know right from wrong because you're above the law. So if you can get your tax return to be a such and such amount or whatever, you're just doing what you were trained to do. And so
Mm.
I had to ask and figure out, like, if I do this, is it illegal? Like, I don't know. It was allowed in the group, but I don't know if it's allowed in real life. And
Mm.
so my survival or training, I guess, I really had to deconstruct almost everything that I grew up learning.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, it's very true. It's a whole different world. And I can speak to answer your question. Yes, it's the same in other groups as well. That, yes, we're supposed to follow the law as long as it goes along with our law, which is God's law. That's what they would tell us. And so, of course, there are certain things. You probably heard the term bleed the beast, which basically
Yeah.
take as much money from the government as possible, to get around taxes and things like that. So that was taught in, I think, across the board in many of these groups. I did, before we move on too far, I wanted to ask as well. So, did your husband serve time, your ex husband serve time in prison for what he
He
did?
did. He ended up plea bargaining for a year and got out after 9 months.
Okay.
Okay.
Did the harassment towards you stop after that? Like, was that able to be at least a sign of like, stop messing with me or else I'm going to come forward with more of your secrets?
They definitely stopped harassing me after that, but before that, when they were sending people around to kidnap my girls, I called my oldest brother from my mom's kids. He had left, married, and then gone back. And
Oh, wow.
so after a couple of visits from people that were supposed to kidnap my girls, I called my oldest brother and I said, Daniel is sending people to visit me that are supposed to kidnap my girls. And I just want to tell you, if my girls ever disappeared, I will have the media on all of your porches before you can turn around. So you better
Hmm.
tell Daniel to back off. And he said,
Good for
okay, I'll
you.
give him a message. And then I stopped getting visits after that. So because I could not handle having that happen for very long. A few visits and I was like, this has to end. I cannot. I was still living in Salt Lake when I left. I moved 10 blocks away from my apartment when I was in polygamy.
Oh,
And
wow.
I didn't have any other place to go. So I was like, this has to end. I will lose my mind if I have to stress about this.
Well, good
Well,
for
yeah, that's
you.
amazing. Congratulations for being willing and strong enough to stand up against them, because that is something that is so hard for people
Yeah.
that grow up in these closed off groups, is that they are afraid to stand up against the people that have harmed them. So good for you. I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that starting to work, you realized that you needed more of an education
Mm.
and realized that you needed to get your like high school diploma or GED. What did that journey look like for you?
So I had 3 years of high school to complete to get my diploma. But I really wanted my diploma. I didn't want a GED. And so I went to the high school in the area and I said, what do I need to do to get my diploma? So they would hand me a math book and they said, do every assignment in this math book for 1 credit of math. So I'd take the book home. At this point, I had gone to a temp service and asked them to place me in a job that paid at least $10 an hour so that I could support my family. And so I ended up getting put in collections. So I would take my math book to work, and I was a temp, so I was ignored a lot, which was really to my advantage. I was given this pile of past due collections that nobody had wanted to do. And so I took my math book to work and I would call collections and they would say, oh, well, they're on the other line. I say, I'll hold. And then I would
Mm.
just work on my math. And my boss thought that I was in college. And I didn't say what I was doing, but they knew I was working on homework. And people would get back on the phone. They say, are you still there? And I'd look at my computer. Oh, this is who I'm talking to. Yes, I'm still here. And then people started paying their bills because I was willing to hold for them to talk to me. And the manager there ended up sending me flowers for collecting all of their accounts. But really, my goal was just to try to finish high school, and it just really worked out to have that specific job at the time. I also did a few night classes, and I did get my GED because it gave you 5 credits towards your diploma. So I did get my diploma a year after I left,
Wow.
and I called my mom up and I said, I'm getting my high school diploma. I'm graduating and I want you to come. I don't know if you will, but you're invited. And I let her know like maybe a month or so ahead of time. And then the next time I went to the high school counselor, she said, what is happening? All of a sudden, all of these girls from this address, which was their office address on State Street, she said, all of a sudden, all these girls need to graduate high school this year. And so
Whoa.
when I graduated high school, I walked with the night classes, right? Probably 20 girls from the order graduated too because they were trying to prove a point to me that yeah, you can graduate when you're in the order. And I just remember thinking, you're welcome. You guys
Yeah,
Yeah.
wouldn't even
seriously.
be here if I wouldn't have pointed it out that I was not allowed to go to school when I was in the order, and now I am allowed to graduate. Suddenly, all these girls from the office needed to graduate too, so they could be at my graduation. I was just like, you're welcome.
Wow, that's
Sheesh.
awesome that you were able to influence in that way. Whether they want to admit how it happened or not, you
Mm.
know what you
Yeah.
did, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so I mean, I guess I don't understand exactly why. Do you think they were just trying to say that, oh, our girls are better than you or just as good as you, even though you left? Or it's just such an interesting thing that they would all of a sudden say that it's okay that they do go to school.
Well, they were trying to prove me wrong
Okay.
because after I left, they're like, why would you leave? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? And I was like, well, I left so that I can have a life for myself. And like, you can have a
Mm.
life in the order. And I said, I'm not even allowed to go to high school. I'm not even allowed to
Mhm.
graduate high school. Now that I've left, I'm allowed to graduate high school because I can make my own choices. And they're
Mhm.
like, we can make our own choices. And all of a sudden, 20 girls are graduating because they were told to go graduate and make their own choices.
Oh my word. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But
Did you go on to get more education after that?
Yeah, I went to the community college, Salt Lake Community College, and I was going to be a paralegal. And then right before I graduated, I realized I don't want to work in a law office because I did have a part time job in a law office and I didn't like it. And so I kept going to school thinking I'll eventually figure out what I want to do, what I want to graduate with. And I was a single mom. I was able to get grants. I was able to pay for school. I'd figured all that out. And then I met my husband, and moved away from Salt Lake, which was really, really what I needed. And then I ended up getting into real estate. So I never got a
Wow.
degree, but I've gone to school long enough that I could have probably.
Yeah, no,
That's
that's
awesome though.
amazing. That's amazing, and happy to hear that you found a husband. And how is your life now? I mean, you are now remarried. It sounds like,
Mhm.
and you've created a great life for yourself, from what we hear. How are things?
So I have been married to my husband for 22 years.
Oh,
And I
amazing.
tell you, he's a trooper because that first year I was like, what have I done? Like it was so stressful and it was so hard to, anytime anything went wrong, it was because I made the wrong choice. And it was just a lot of healing, a lot of therapy. He was willing to go to therapy with me, but really, I needed the therapy. I married him because I could see that I was a priority to him. You know, I
Mm.
he I dated him for a year. I didn't even know his first name when I dated him because he introduced himself as Cooper. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I was going to school, taking care of my girls, and he just kept coming back around and coming back around. And finally, when he was activated in the military, stationed in California, and he drove to Salt Lake for the weekend to go on a date with me, and then drove back. And that's when I
Mm,
realized,
Oh.
oh my gosh, maybe I should hold on to this one because before that I
mm,
wouldn't have given him a second thought. But I was really not in a good place to accept anybody else's love for me. And so to see the extent of what he was willing to do for me, I was like, okay, maybe I should consider him. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, well, I don't want to marry again, but I don't want to lose him either. And so I married him, but I said, I don't think I can anticipate being married again. If we don't get married today, I don't think I'm going to be able to marry you. And he was like, well, no, you deserve a wedding, all of that. And I said, I don't even want that. I was like, I can't anticipate being married again. So if we're going to get married, we just have to do it. And
mm,
so we went back and forth. And finally, it was like, okay, if we can find someone that will marry us today, then we'll get married today. And if not, then I will consider marrying you in April. That's how the conversation went. And so, and this was a Black Friday, and I didn't know what you needed to get married. Like, I didn't know you had to get a marriage certificate and anything like that.
mm.
So he called his bishop, and his family wasn't active. And the bishop's like, well, yeah, if you have a marriage license, then I can marry you today. And I was like, oh, well, okay. And so then I was like, okay, if we can get a marriage license today, then we'll get married today. And if not, then I'll consider marrying you in April. And so we went to the county office and got a marriage license and then went outside and we looked at each other and we're like, we are getting married today. So then he left to go get rings. I left to go get a dress and called somebody to bring my girls from the babysitter. And then we got married that night. And his bishop was like, well, this isn't forever. Why would you do this? And I was like, I don't want to get married forever. That sounds terrifying to me. Like if I have to anticipate forever, then I won't get married. And so none of it made sense to really anybody. But I was just like, I don't want to lose you and I don't want to get married. So this is the only way. And
Mm,
it's not that I
Oh,
didn't want to get married. I just didn't want the anticipation of being married again.
right.
yeah.
After everything.
And bless his heart, he has stuck it out with me and we have the best relationship I could ever ask for.
Mm,
Mm.
And so he adopted my two little girls. And
wow.
Mm.
so we all have the same last name, except for my oldest is married now. And then 15 years later, when Allison came into our life, he was so supportive in helping her leave and so
Mm.
supportive in being there for her. And if I didn't know how to handle a situation, he did, and he would step up and he would say, "This is what we're willing to tolerate, and this is, this is what's what, basically." And
Yeah.
if I was week, and I said, "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can help somebody leave. It's so triggering." He was like, "I got you." And then a
Mhm.
year after Allison left, then I had another 17-year-old dropped off at my house, and I helped her get emancipated and go through that because that's what she wanted. And I was like, I don't know if I can take in another one. And then after that, I realized, okay, somebody needs to do something. And I am somebody and I know what needs to be done. And so that's when I started Hope After Polygamy with 4 other women. And we all decided to start with education because that was the least triggering subject that we could help with.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And we do want to get a little bit more into the Hope After Polygamy because I think it's an amazing thing you're doing to help people. Just really quick before we move on, just for our viewers, you mentioned Allison. We know who Allison is, but could you just say just a quick, is she related to you and why was she dropped off at your house?
15 years after I left, I'm sitting on the couch with my husband, and I get a phone call from a niece that had also left the Kingstons. And she said that her 16-year-old sister had left because she was getting pressured to be married. I told my husband, and we talked about it, and we were like, we are going to be held liable for harboring a runaway if we do this. And so we knew we had to be strategic and careful. And we said, yeah, if she wants to come stay with us, we'll take her, and we'll help her go through the court system and leave. And it was 9 months of going to court with Daniel, who was her biological father. It was hard because he insisted that she go to foster care so that she wasn't in my drug house, because
Mm.
every time he showed up in court, he would say, well, we just don't want her at Luann's house because her and her whole family are on drugs. And so
What?
it just became a running joke. Because so the backstory of that is, why would you ever leave the order? You must be on drugs,
Okay.
Mm.
right? And so that was just
Yeah.
kind of a running thing that they would say. And I was asked after I left, why did you leave? Are you on drugs? And I
Oh
Wow.
remember
gosh.
thinking, well, yeah, why else would I leave? So, so that was the comment that he had to make every time he showed up in court, every month for 9 months. And I just sat there in the audience thinking, I'm not the one on trial here. Like, on trial to see if Allison can come back to you. I'm not the one on trial here. I'm just a support. And so, 9 months of going to court, Daniel showed up one day and said, we're ready to relinquish our parental rights. And that was a really hard day. It was a hard day for Allison. It was hard to watch. It was hard to watch her mom relinquish her parental rights because I knew she didn't want to, and you could tell that she didn't want to. And you could tell that Daniel did not care about the emotional casualties that had happened that day between
Hmm.
Allison and her mom. I really did a little bit feel like the bad guy that day because I knew that Allison was going to end up at my house and her mom had to relinquish her parental rights because Daniel told her to. And so it really did, a little part of me just did feel like the bad guy because I knew that they considered me the bad guy. But after they relinquished their parental rights, then Daniel said, we just want to reiterate, we don't want her at Luann's house because her and her whole family are on drugs. And then the judge asked the guardian ad litem, well, where does Allison want to
Mhm.
go? And Allison said, well, she wants to go to Luann's house. She said, based off of the in-home evaluation that we did at Luann's house, we're going to place her in her home
Mm.
temporarily for 30 days and we'll revisit. And so it was bittersweet because Daniel got to watch her get placed in my home, but also her mom had to relinquish her parental rights, and then she got sent to my home. And so lots of emotions that day. But then we went back after 30 days
Hmm.
and scheduled an adoption day. And then 30 days after that, we ended up adopting Allison. And it was meant to be. I've always felt like it was never a goal of mine, but as it happened, I just felt like this was meant to be. Like, this is supposed to happen. It's just weird because I don't walk around thinking stuff like that. Like, my life isn't full of intuition like that, I guess. But in this situation, it was very clear to me that this was supposed to happen. So we just moved forward with it and did the adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is part of the reason why I started Hope After Polygamy, is because these girls that are leaving now are still having to escape.
She's very, very lucky to have you and your husband to be there with her through all of that,
Yeah.
especially at such a young, vulnerable age. So that's super wonderful.
And then it sounds like because of these girls that you saw that were in need and were coming to you for help, you started Hope After Polygamy. And could you just give just a quick rundown what that is and how viewers could support you in the mission that you are on today?
Yes, so we started Hope After Polygamy because we want to support people that have left polygamy go to school. Because the average
Mm.
person that leaves polygamy has an eighth grade education. So education is
Mhm.
a huge need, and learning how to figure it out on your own is hard. And so we want to help support them financially to get their GED. We want to help support them financially to get their degree, or if they're going to a tech college, just to get job school skills, a job skills certificate. We want to help pay for that because what one of the biggest needs after you leave polygamy is you need a job and you
Yeah.
need the certification to get a job. And so we've been able to help people with an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree, but also tech degrees and also certificates. And
Wow.
as we're growing, we're able to reach out to people and say, "Hey, have you thought of going to school, or what are you doing right now?" "Oh, I'm trying to get this certificate or this degree, or I'm trying to go this route, or I want to do this, or I want to do that." And you just know that they're driven, and if we help them, then it will better their lives. And that's our motivation to do what we do. We're 100% volunteers, and our payment is to see people succeed after they leave polygamy.
I love that so much. It's true. It seems like in almost all of these groups,
Yeah.
Sam, same thing, eighth grade education. It seems to be right at those early teen years is when they shift priorities, whether it's men going to work and making money for the group or women becoming, or not women, young girls becoming wives too young.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
it's just awesome what you guys are doing. I did want to also mention, you had mentioned that you have some fundraisers coming up. And
Mm.
we'll definitely leave links in the description to everything Luann is talking about and to their website. But can you share a little bit about your upcoming fundraisers?
Yes, so to raise money for our fall scholarships, we have a 5K coming up on May 31st, and I'll send you the link. All proceeds to this 5K will go towards fall scholarships. And then save the date for September 13th. We're going to do a car show at the Utah Motocross out in Tooele, and all the proceeds for that will go towards our spring scholarships.
Wow.
Awesome.
Amazing. Amazing. And honestly, because I'm someone that left one of these types of groups and came out into this big bad world, as I thought, but just didn't know where to turn or who to ask, or I never thought it even would be possible to get some type of education. I thought that I had missed my chance. I was too old now to go back and start where I left off. But thankfully, I had people to help guide me in the right direction and say, no, you can go get your GED and you can go to college. And then eventually I realized I can do this. And so it's something that I was able to do, and am proud to say that I was able to go and graduate from college. And but I must say it was very difficult at first. So having someone like Luann here and your organization to help guide people and say, hey, you can do this. You might not think you can, but you can, is
Mhm.
such a huge resource. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, and we want to tell them you can do this and we can help you do this.
Right.
We've
Yeah.
had recipients tell us, "You're the first person that's made me feel like somebody believes in me." And
Mm.
that really means a lot to us because I've been there. Like, I have felt like I was the only person that believed in me for a while. And if we can even just help with that, then we've succeeded.
Well, Luann, thank you so much for all this wonderful information and for such an awesome organization. We always like to end our interviews with the question that if you could say one thing to a girl who is still in the group that you came from, or I guess girl or boy, but what would you say to somebody who's still in that group if you knew that they would listen to what you had to say?
I would tell them, you are allowed to take up space, and you are important, and your dreams matter, and you matter. And there are people out here that want to help you if you want to leave.
Got me choked up.
Amen. And thank you. Yeah. And way to get us all choked up at the end here. But thank you so much, Luann. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing and for the light that you're shining in this world. And we hope that for anyone listening that you have been able to find some help, especially if you're someone that is going through hard times, that listening to other people share their stories has been able to help you. So thank you for being here with us today, Luann. And thank you all so much, our viewers, for being here. And we look forward to talking with you all soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, you guys.